Senator Rabe, you are back.
I'm ready to be back. There's so much more to talk about. We only talked about housing, but not everything else.
You know what was very interesting, and I have to admit, I had known you had traveled to California for some period of time and like worked in the, housing industry there and a couple other things. And I'm not immune to these things. Like I definitely had some prejudice coming in. Like I enjoy talking to people. I'm just like, oh, she probably thinks this. And not that you would ever know that, because I'm totally fair with the conversation. But when you got to the point when you were like, I don't believe in rent control, and I think there is an industry in place to maintain the homeless population and maintain homelessness, like it's an industrial complex in California, my jaw dropped. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. Because here you are as a Democratic senator in Idaho saying, look, man, I've seen the darkness.
Right.
Like I've been there. I've witnessed it. We can't go down that road.
And we're heading that direction unless we do something.
God bless you. So talk to me about this, because again, people like me, I lived in Oakland and Berkeley from 2000 to 2012. I lived with like people defecating on sidewalks. Yep. I lived through the origins of the Occupy movement, where like that's really where the tent cities came from, where people congregated, and then it was this political commentary and we couldn't clear them out. And then laws got passed to make it like, it used to be like if you parked your stuff on the sidewalk, people get rid of it. And then sometime around like, I think it was 2010, there was this mass legislative movement like, no, they're kind of like engaged in political speech. Like you can't really steal their stuff. You can't move their things. And all of a sudden people took over, either with RVs or physical tents or whatever. And like California's very mild climate.
And just leave them.
Yeah, and you just had to leave them alone in peace to do whatever they want. And then it became this open drug scene.
Big safety, hygiene problem, public health issues.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, I saw all of that firsthand. Yep. Like we would walk, my wife and I would walk to get a coffee and a split a muffin every morning before we had kids. And this was in Berkeley. And we just saw it get worse and worse and worse. So,
and everyone here knows it too.
Yes.
We talk to any Idahoan and they're like, yeah, I've been to Seattle. I've been to San Francisco, Portland, Los Angeles, most big cities in the United States. There are tens of thousands of people living outside on the streets and sidewalk. 1 million people in the United States. It's a very common problem. We don't have that big of a problem here in Idaho, and we can solve it, but we have to do something.
Right.
Because the main cause is rising cost of housing. But, the way now that California treats homelessness and addresses homelessness, there's no way at this point of getting out of it. They're paying for hundreds of millions of dollars to essentially keep people homeless.
Okay. Listen, I'm going to shut up. I want you to go. You spent years in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Boots
3
on
years.
The ground.
I was working for a technical assistance firm. So we basically, which is part of the complex, most of
the homeless complex.
Yeah, the homeless the homeless industrial complex.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is what we're talking about today, right? And solutions too. I think that Idaho can implement to try to avoid that from happening here. But
right, what did you see when you were there? Like what happened?
So I was working for a technical assistance firm, and we are kind of the middleman between federal government, state government, and providers to try to address the problem of homelessness. We had 30, 40 staff getting paid pretty decent salaries to basically help these providers navigate the complexities of utilizing federal funding to solve homelessness.
Okay, so back up. So you guys had 30 to 40 full-time staff that were dedicated to helping service providers that were gaining grants from the federal government.
Mostly the feds, some state. Yeah, we would help them get some state money, but there's so much complexity around it and navigating these grants and how you manage the grants that most of these providers have to hire these technical assistance firms, or local governments will hire technical assistance firms to help them navigate how to comply with the funding.
Okay. So say I'm a guy, I'm like, I'm an organization that wants to provide sleeping bags. Okay. And there's a federal grant that will supply me with money to get these sleeping bags. And by the way,
good luck.
Okay. So I'm like, hey, we have 10 people that want to draw salaries, and we want to draw salaries from these grants and then supply these sleeping bags to these homeless people. It's so complex that even within our 10-person organization that's funded completely by these federal grants, we can't figure this out.
We can't
So then
figure
we
this out.
take a portion of the grant money and hire a technical.
technical
So we're
firm.
like, okay, you guys have to help us understand how to get money from them and supply all of us with, supply all the people working there with salaries, benefits, retirement, so we can deliver
Yes.
a sleeping bag to that guy over there.
Exactly. The federal grants are so complex. And let me be clear. Federal funding is necessary to solve homelessness. I think we need federal dollars, and we know what it takes to solve homelessness. So we know what solutions work. And those solutions are usually what federal grants fund right now. Rapid rehousing. So that's one intervention that provides people that are homeless, who are very high needs, with time limited rental assistance, 3 to 24 months usually, and supportive services to get them out of homelessness. There's permanent supportive housing, which we can talk about because that's a very complex and controversial topic, right?
Sure.
Is a long-term subsidy for permanent housing for people, usually dedicated to people that are high utilizers, have been homeless for years, not capable of being self-sufficient or financially independent. They get those not time limited, they're lifetime essentially subsidies. And then you have some money from HUD going to homeless shelters, and then other funding. But there's also money for homeless prevention, which is what my nonprofit does. But each of these funding sources is very complex to navigate. You have to have detailed policies and procedures when you're serving a client. Just for example, if we
when you're serving the client, that's the homeless person.
The
is your
homeless
client.
person,
Okay.
yeah. So the person who's homeless, or it could be a tenant if it's homeless prevention, or they're in housing with rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. So when you're serving that client, you have to keep detailed records. You have to have a really detailed checklist of all of these requirements that the federal government requires. You have to show documentation. You have to get documentation from the landlords, documentation on the tenants' income, situation, very detailed case notes. And then your program policies also have to comply with all of these requirements that they have as well. And you have to, train your providers on how to use these things, how to understand them. There's so many boxes to check and hoops to jump through that there is, I would argue, a lot of waste spent to address homelessness, because you have to spend so much money just to understand how to navigate federal funding. And because of that, some providers have stepped away and said, we're going to just try to go more in the direction of private funding. This is too much trouble. You've got to do annual audits with all your federal funders. They're, looking at every single file that you have in great detail, these 20, 30-page files that you have on these clients. They're trying to find something that's wrong with the way you're administering services. And what I would say is, we know what it takes to solve homelessness. Get people out of homelessness.
Sure.
Give them supportive services. So a social worker that walks them through, how to set up a budget, how to make a plan for the future, why it's important for them to not end up in this situation again, what barriers they need to address within themselves so they can be financially independent going forward, or stay in housing, whatever they are able to do. And then money. People need money to get out of homelessness too. It's those two things. And we add so many layers of complexity on top of that. And I understand why, in part. Society is complex. We've got to create uniformity. We have to have consistency. We have to make sure there's not fraud. But I do think, from the way, the way things get translated from the top down, from the federal government to the place service providers are at, there's just so many layers of bureaucracy that have been created.
Yeah, just hearing you articulate all of these different, again, boxes to check. So you're there years ago. You're working for this technical firm that's helping these providers. And again, the motivation of the providers is that, like, we can get an organization to function. Everybody gets paid. We have to be serving a client, and that client is the homeless, or short-term tenant, or whatever it is. And there's an abundance of clients. Like, if you want to start a restaurant, you're like, I need people that want to eat food. I got to go where the people are that like, Italian food. Like I'll open it up in the Italian part of town or something. So for the providers, they're like, okay, I have a bleeding heart for homeless people. I want to spend my time doing this, not as like not as, a volunteerism, but like I want to make a business, be it for profit or nonprofit out of this. I want to use the federal funding. I have to go where the homeless people are. So you have a homeless population. And then you have these providers that come on top of that and they're like, okay, these are all of our potential clients. And that then obviously if you're a homeless person and let's say there's homeless people stretched out across different areas, they're like, okay, well, look, I can hang out in this place. There aren't very many people that are like eager to help me through this. But you know who's eager to help me through it? This provider way over here, which starts attracting theoretically more people where it's like, okay, and they have all these people and services that walk through this stuff.
Well, so if you're getting federal funding, there's an added layer of complexity there about who you serve. So the federal government,
does my address or non-address have to be like closer to the providers?
The federal government no. But you have to have certain vulnerabilities that are assessed using an assessment tool that the entire community has to agree to and utilize. And you have to go through one access point and utilize that same assessment. So let me tell you.
So if I'm homeless, I might go to one of the providers and they're like, you're not homeless and vulnerable.
You're not homeless enough because you.
That's a phrase. You're not homeless enough. Okay, go.
Or that is exactly how it works.
Oh my God.
So you have to have, every community has to have what's called a continuum of care. That continuum of care is supposed to include every single provider that works in homeless services, definitely required to participate if you receive any federal or probably local funding if your local government's involved in the COC. That COC receives funding for what's called a coordinated entry system. If you are homeless and you want to access the federal resources, you have to go through the coordinated entry system. And I understand the reasoning of it in part because you don't want the reasoning is you want homeless resources to go to people that absolutely need them. Okay. So, and you want the types of resources that people need to match what they get. So you don't want somebody that was just homeless yesterday. They got evicted, lost their home. They've been living in their car for one night to get a very coveted spot in a permanent supportive housing building over someone who has been homeless for 20 years sleeping on the streets. And there are reasons for this. So,
wait, so the 20-year vet who's like, I've been out here for a while. I've been putting in my time. I put in my app 2 decades ago. That apartment's mine. And you're like, yeah, man. Yeah, the apartment's yours. And then the other person who's like, I just slept in my car with my kids. Like let's say my spouse died or they left me and I'm like, I have all these problems. I need housing. They're like, you ain't homeless. You haven't suffered enough.
They're not prioritized.
You're not homeless enough.
They are not prioritized. So you have to, every person that is homeless has to take an assessment that has to be adopted by the continuum of care. It's usually called a vulnerability assessment. And there are lots of different assessments that have been used. Some of them are very long. Different localities have like a 20-page questionnaire. Some just have a 1-page. We in Boise have like a 1-page questionnaire. It's pretty simple. But from that questionnaire, the homeless individual or family is scored. So they get points based on their vulnerabilities. So if you have a disability, you might get more points. The length of time you've been homeless will give you more points. If you're a survivor of domestic violence, you might get some. It kind of depends on the community and what they prioritize in terms of vulnerabilities. A lot of communities will prioritize people that are high utilizers.
Yeah, by utilizers, you mean drug addicts?
No.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Okay, because you mentioned that before. I was like, what's a utilizer?
High frequent utilizers of services, meaning they have used the healthcare system or the first responders, basically been in the ER or encountering with, police or things like that frequently, a lot of times it's folks that are costing the health system a lot of money. And the reason is because they're costing the community more money. We
And
want
they
to get
attribute
them.
that to homelessness. So like, hey, leaving them on the street will cost us as society
More
through
money.
ambulance visits, through hospital visits, through all these things. We should get this person off of the street, and that would be a net benefit financially
It does.
for us. So like, if somebody's a high utilizer and they've been homeless for the same amount of time who's somebody who's not a high utilizer, who's like perhaps not ending up in the ER and not calling
And
the
they
ambulance.
can be self-sufficient. They can probably figure it out on their own at this point, right? They can, the person that's been homeless for one night, they can maybe even just get $1,000 to get into a place and be okay. They don't need a permanent voucher for the rest of their life. Whereas someone who is a high utilizer probably does. But here's the thing. So we've talked about the cost of homelessness that the federal government puts on just through bureaucracy. There's an administrative burden to maintaining homelessness, in part because of the federal government, but also because the problem is extremely complex and there's so many different providers that you have to coordinate. There's another cost of homelessness that is just the fact that homelessness exists. There are things that we need to do around homelessness that cost money. Like San Francisco pays about $100,000 a month to clean up, poop and needles from the streets.
That's it? I would have thought
probably
it was
more. It probably is more.
It was more.
When I was there 5 years ago, it was something around.
It's definitely more now.
It's
I don't know what it
probably
is, but it's more now.
It's more now. The cost to run a shelter, and then the cost that I'm getting into, which is the cost that homeless people who are homeless are to the community in using services, which is usually first responders, healthcare systems, things like that. So we did a study here.
May I say something real fast? I have a brother-in-law who's in the Berkeley PD, and years ago he told me we had rain, right? And in rain, he's like, oh, here it goes. Of like, what's happening? He's like, oh, the second we have a big rain, every homeless person in the city says they have chest pain, an ambulance comes and they like pop them into a bed in the hospital.
Or they'll like intentionally, some folks will even get ticketed so they can spend the night in a jail to have just a warm place to sleep and a roof over their head.
So, okay.
And so, I mean,
so that's a high utilizer.
Yeah. And so our community actually, in a lot of communities, a high utilizer might cost upwards of $100,000 a year to the community. And that's the cost of county services, city services, nonprofits, and hospitals.
And that's just one person.
One person. In our community, we did a study that each person who is more chronically homeless, we have, I mentioned last time about 2,000 people in Ada County that we know of that qualify as homeless, technically under the federal definition. And of those, we have a subset of folks that are more chronically homeless. So they've been homeless for a longer period of time. We know we did a study with the Idaho Policy Institute through Boise State some years ago that showed that each person costs the community $53,000 per year.
Each chronic homeless person.
Yes. So we built, permanent supportive housing more recently here. Our first attempt at this new path that housed 40 of the most chronically homeless folks in the community, those high utilizers. Frequently utilizers, whatever you want to call them, and folks that have struggled more than others. And we housed 40 of the top folks, and in the first year saved the community $1 million. Over 5 years, saved almost $9 million.
Okay.
So if you can get them out, those folks out first. So there are reasonings the federal government builds some of this bureaucracy. It creates challenges, but if you can get those higher utilizers, especially attached to the more permanent subsidies first, get them out of homelessness, you do end up saving a lot of money.
Was this I don't know anything about this, but I do know that there was discussion of people in the city of Boise housing homeless people at like a hotel in the last, summer. Yes. Was this that program?
No.
Okay, because that one did not sound
that was like kind of more like hotels were being treated like shelter.
Gotcha.
Just to kind of expand the shelter, because during the pandemic, we didn't want folks who are homeless out on the streets, spreading the illness and getting the illness.
Sure.
All those things. So we used COVID money to just kind of expand the shelter with a hotel.
Gotcha.
But that was temporary. New path is a permanent supportive housing building, like a project that we built with community partners several years ago. And yeah, it's still there.
One thing that people I know are worried about is that you create something like what you're talking about, like a new path, like an actual physical project that with the intention of getting chronically homeless people on, and we have some manner of subsidies, and we make life better for them by being like, okay, you're not going to be sleeping in like outside in a Boise winter or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or not going directly to the emergency room every time it snows, and like not all of these things are getting ticketed, whatever it might be. But they're
And
also
getting health needs addressed too, because a lot of these folks have really serious health issues, so they're in the hospitals a lot.
okay. So
Yeah.
what is to be done? Is there any ask of them? Because I know a big concern that people bring up over and over and over is like, yeah, let's, like Reverend Bill Roscoe, like, listen, we don't even have, you know what blew me away about him when I met with him? He's like, we don't even have time limits. I was like, what do you mean you don't have time limits? He's like, if somebody's in our program and they're making progress, we have no limit of time where it's like,
really
you got to be done by this time. And I was like, isn't this the number one criticism? He's like, no.
Because a lot
But
of
they have
shelters
to be,
max out
that's
the number
right.
of days.
That's right.
Stay.
And he's like, listen, as long as
long as
they're
you're making
sober
progress.
and making progress, we will stand by you. And that could take 3 months. It could take 3 years. And as long as you're sober and fighting the fight, like clawing forward for your life, we will not let you down. He's like, now, if you relapse, if you just want to drink, if you just want a place to stay overnight and keep going, like, we're not your jam. But if you want to make progress, we're here for you. And I found that so beautiful and so counterintuitive. I was like, wow, I had not thought about that. But I know that's a concern that people have, which is like, when we start providing community funded housing for people, are we allowing or perpetuating open drug scenes?
Right. So permanent supportive housing does include services. It is a challenge to get people to engage in services. I'll just say that out loud. It's true, because a lot of these folks have been living outside, sometimes for decades, and they haven't lived in housing, and they don't want to be told what to do. They want to do things a certain way. So, but there are services on site or mobile services, depending on how this housing is set up, if it's scattered site or project based. And services are available to folks. They are expected to engage in those services. Case managers will constantly talk to folks, try to get them to, improve their situation however they can. There are things called move on programs with that. So folks will try to get basically from this permanent supportive housing voucher to transition onto a kind of a different voucher, like a Section 8 voucher, where they're expected to put 30% of their income towards their rent,
Sure.
and the rest is kind of covered. So they'll try to get them engaged on that, and get them to be as financially independent and self-sufficient as possible. But I will say the folks who are prioritized for these permanent housing vouchers are in a pretty difficult situation, usually health-wise. They have some severe disability. They're much older, things like that. So they're not really able to go off on their own ever, especially if they've been living outside for decades. And some of that's because of, maybe just how they were born or raised, or some of it's because they were homeless for that long.
Right.
They're just not in a place where they can be self-sufficient. So the case management is always, case managers, social workers are working directly with these people. That's what people should know. However, you're kind of getting into the debate about housing first, because there is some debate about when people get into a housing complex like New Path, should we require them to stop using drugs, resolve their health issues, get a job, or whatever it is before they go into that housing? What research has shown and what providers will tell you from experience.
Yeah, if I may say it real fast,
Please.
if you're looking for somebody to get a job, resolve all their issues and everything, and then you give them an apartment, they wouldn't need the apartment.
Exactly.
If they like had all this stuff.
That's what I was about to say.
Like, I don't know anything about this, but it's like, listen, I'm homeless because I have a mental illness or I don't have a job. Like, if you want me to be this person who's doing all of these things right out of the blocks, then what am I doing hanging out with you? Like, I got it locked down. Like, I gotta, any of the more affordable, like even if you want, and again, just like if you looked at the most economically viable, there was somebody showed me a mobile home park. There was this beautiful mobile home that was like the single wide, and it was done really nice, had like nice flooring and nice walls and everything. And it was like, it cost $50,000. And I'm not saying like a homeless person goes from being homeless to buying it, but I do understand that there's a rental market around, mobile homes. And it's like, look, man, like if I was homeless, this would be a totally viable option. What you want, $200 a month, right? For this, or $300 a month. Like, I could probably scrap that together. And like, it was a fine place to live. Like I've lived in much smaller, not as nice places, right? Like no problem. And, but again, that presupposes the existence of somebody who's functionally active within the community and like doesn't have all these other considerations.
Right. And those folks, like I said, they're not prioritized for those more permanent vouchers because the goal is to get them to go out on their own. So they might be, if they're homeless, they might be prioritized for just one-time security deposit, first month's rent, and gotten into housing, or maybe a more 3 to 6 month voucher to help them gradually cycle off. So the first few months the program will pay 100%. Then the next month they'll pay 60%, then 30%, to kind of cycle them off. And there's services involved with all of these things. Again, like going back to my original statement, solving homelessness is actually very simple. It's, we
get houses for people to live in,
give them money and give them the services side is so important. And it is included in HUD funding and federal funding and any homeless program. There's always supportive services that folks are expected to engage in.
One big distinction that I think needs to be flushed out is when a lot of people are like, hey, we're giving housing to people doing drugs, and then like, like in Berkeley or Oakland, like you see people on drugs. Like last time I was in the city, or it was like horrifying in San Francisco. I mean, like I've never really I'm not a drug user, right? So like it kind of comes as a shock, and I was there just for this thing, and like you literally see people just shooting up with needles in broad daylight. You're like, oh my, like how is this happening? Yeah. And there's a difference between open drug scenes and people being without housing. Like there's a difference here. What I experience when I go to a place like San Francisco or Oakland or Berkeley is open drug scenes. And that's not the same thing as saying like somebody's home. Like you can have I occasionally go to like 8th Street, like we're near 8th Street.
Right.
And there are occasionally people there with like signs asking for stuff. And my son, one of them, God bless him, he was like, hey, that sign says he's a vet. Like, should we do something? And it's like, we're like, hey, look, there are great places to donate, like, Boise Rescue Mission and all these things. Like, and my wife and I felt really callous explaining this to him, but like we experienced so much of the homeless complex in Berkeley and Oakland. It's like you couldn't even eat at lunch like when I was like an 18-year-old, like you couldn't even eat lunch without like people coming and like attempting to like take your food or whatever. It's like, what the hell?
It's a norm. It's totally normal there. People don't care is the thing. They'll just walk right by it. That was something I really, struggled with personally living there, was that it was just so accepted as this is normal. We have over 10,000 people living outside, and right next door we have somebody making $10 million a year, just stepping over them on the sidewalk on their way to work, watching them shoot up, just like it's a normal day. It's like,
I remember when I was,
wrong here.
I think I was a junior and walking from my apartment on the north end of Berkeley to class, and they have a BART train there, like a metro, like Bay Area Rapid Transit, and there was like the steam vent, and this guy, it was like 8 a.m. in Berkeley, and this guy was like stripped from the waist down, standing over, like sitting on the steam vent and getting like a steam bath. There it was. Like. Yeah. And was like trying to choke down my croissant or something. Like I was like, gosh, man,
stuff like that.
Yeah, you see stuff.
Time.
So
it's really tough.
And so again, when you're saying like, hey, first off, let's take a financial decision. Or you're like, all right, look, this person,
we could get them out of
this is a homeless person right here. Okay, it's a box of tissues if you didn't know, but it's like we could say it's a homeless person, and Okay, would you like to spend $100,000 and have this person outside, have them frequently utilizing emergency services, have them taking up time with our law enforcement, our ambulances, and our hospitals? Or would you like to spend $50,000 and have them in a house or an apartment or something like that? And the answer that most people give is, hey, if they get to do drugs still and get the house,
The answer is no.
I'd rather spend the 100.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, so you'd rather spend 100 on like principal. And they're like, well, we're keeping them homeless if we're giving them housing. It's like, this person has been homeless for 20 years. You're not keeping them homeless. They're going to stay homeless regardless of what happens in between now. And so would you want to spend 100 or the 50? Like, which is it? And again, I'm not advocating for, giving unlimited services to people that are just like drug users and whatever, right? But that it seems that you're articulating, that's kind of the decision you need to start making, at least from a financial standpoint. If we have a fiduciary duty to do the best we can with taxpayer dollars, what is in the best interest of the taxpayer with having a chronically homeless person who is not going to pull themselves up by their bootstrap and whatever, like they've been homeless for 20 years, you can take that person and leave them outside and you're going to spend twice as much as if we just found them an apartment.
And that's just the reactionary solution, is like, what do we do once this person is homeless? Do we keep them homeless, pay a lot more money, or do we get them out of homelessness? There's an investment there. There's also the question that our community is wrestling with right now that other communities don't even have an opportunity to ask, which is, what do we do with all these new people coming into the system?
Okay, so where are these people coming from? Like, what is
the
this?
Folks that are new? They're just coming from rentals. I mean, the folks that are becoming homeless in our community are renters. They've been making it work for several years, but they can't afford the 40% increase in rent that has occurred over the last 5-6 years. And they're getting paid the same amount, maybe a little bit more, but definitely not 40% more. So they're paying, $400 or $500 more every single month, living on the line. Life happens to them. They get a divorce. Their car breaks down. They lose their job. A lot of health issues. Their kid gets sick, whatever it is. They have all these healthcare bills. Suddenly they can't afford their rent. They get evicted. And they're homeless. And they're people that have made it work for years. You talk to any person who's homeless outside and ask them how they ended up homeless in the first place. The very first thing that happened, or snowball effect of things. Ask them. They lost their housing, right? And
bro, that's the nature of becoming homeless. You lost your housing.
And it's usually because, a variety of factors, but challenges that a lot of times are out of their control. Sometimes they're in their control. They make some bad choices. Usually it's a combination of both of those things. But oftentimes, especially right now, it is out of folks' control because it's simply the fact that their rent is up here, their wages are here, and life happens to them, and they don't have $400 in savings to make up the difference. So they're getting evicted, ending up homeless. So what if we invest in those people? And this is what my nonprofit does. What if we give those people a small amount of money to keep them in their housing when they're being evicted? It costs $2,000 to keep someone in their home. Or what if when they first become homeless, what if we had money, say $10,000, to get them into a new place right away, the next day? We would save the community tens of thousands of dollars over time. But no one wants to do that because this person needs to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Oh, why did they end up homeless? It's their fault. They need to figure it out. It's like, well, they're probably going to remain homeless if we don't do something.
A portion of them. Yeah, a portion will. Yeah,
some
for
of them
sure.
will. Yeah, not all of them.
And especially when you start dealing with kids, it's like, look, poo-poo on the parents all day long. Like, fine.
Right.
Okay, that's a 12-year-old.
Yep.
Like, okay, so what experience in life do you want that 12-year-old to have?
Yep.
Like, could we say we're paying the 12-year-old's rent instead of the broken 42-year-old? Like, could we just have that conversation instead? And again, I don't know the particulars of what you're saying, but it does make a lot of sense, which is, look, let's say we break up all of the people that become homeless, like 900 people. We break them up into 3 different categories. Yeah, let's say 300 of those people had a drug problem. Okay, now obviously, it should be said.
Not that many in Idaho, but yeah.
Sure. And it should be said, as economic times get worse for people, diseases of despair and drug use increase. So it's like, okay, this is like the rat park argument. It's like, yeah, if you put a rat in a little cage and it has no connection to anyone else and you give it like cocaine laced water or normal water, it'll take the cocaine. And like, guess what? If we locked you in a cage, you'd probably do the drugs too. But if you take those drug addicted rats and you put them in a fulfilling environment with other rats where they can make little rat babies and they can play with things and see each other and be part of a community, they wean themselves off the drugs and then just drink the normal water. Like, this is the classic experiment. So it's like, okay, is it the presence of the drugs or is it the horrendous life experience that these animals are having, both human and it's like I would, there was this great movie that I saw just a couple weeks ago called Shot Caller. And it's a guy who's a stockbroker and he goes out to celebrate this thing with his friends and he has like one glass of wine too many, gets in a car accident, his friend in the backseat dies. He blows on like a 0.10. So it's like 0.02 too high. So he's drunk, then gets sent to prison as he should, because he's like, there's no way to get out of this. Like that guy's dead and I was absolutely over the legal limit. Then he gets integrated into like and then he was like a riot, all this stuff. And towards the end of the movie, he had like worked his way up this, essentially mafia system within the prison system. And the head guy references, he's like, you should read this book. It's called The Human Animal. And he's making him like the number one. And then eventually the main character, the protagonist, becomes the number one or becomes the head guy. My point is, looking at this, I really like film and I really like writing and I really like thinking about it's like, okay, of all the time, like you have 90 minutes with me. Why did you take 30 seconds to expressly reference this book called The Human Animal and like psychology? And what I took from that movie was essentially, look, this guy was really successful in the white collar world. And when put in a horrible, different world, he became the same person, which is he rose to the top of this new hierarchy. He did whatever he had to do, just like when he was a stockbroker. Now he was just like in the like crazy white mafia prison system. And both instances were to protect his family because he realized that his family was a threat. So he worked his way up the hierarchy in the prison to be the guy who could protect them. And it was this wild thing. And it's like, you're going to become who you are, right? Like that's a really crazy thing. And rats, and like I would say myself, like you can take me to a completely different place. Like, I don't know, happened 3 years ago. Like dump me in Boise. I don't know anyone. I don't know anything. I have no particular value to anyone. And like eventually in a long enough time frame, I become who I am, just like I was in my previous life, in my previous state. Like this is just me, right? And I think that's true for people. Like if you put enough pressure on them, they're gonna crack. Like I can tell you over COVID, when I was in hell, I absolutely drank more. And that was one of the things where I was like, oh, I got to get the hell out. Like I'm drinking, I'm not thriving. I'm coping. I'm going down this horrible, it's not like became an alcoholic or anything, but you're like, these are problems.
I think everyone drank more. Yeah.
Dude, how wild is that though? Like I did one of my original podcasts was about that. I was like, and it was really embarrassing because I was like, I literally had 4 ginger beers last week. It was like, I was making fun of myself, but I stopped myself. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Like you never drink 4 nights a week. And like, and it was ginger beer. Like these were dumb cans of trash. It was that, but it's like, it was alcohol. And it's like, why are you doing that? It doesn't taste particularly good. You're not getting a lot out of it.
Because you're unhappy.
Right. Right. So,
and you're uncomfortable and life is hard.
Right.
And
so let's
people, resort to coping mechanisms.
Right. So you have 30, let's say 300 of the 900 imaginary people fall into homelessness because of drug abuse. Okay. Well, I guarantee you that 300 number will increase if things get worse and worse economically. Right. So is it that they have an addiction to drugs or have they fallen into a situation that is untenable and they can't cope? Right. So you have that portion of people.
Or it's, how they were raised. A lot of these folks score very high on the ACEs scale, which is just adverse childhood experiences. You should take the test and see where you score. But
I do not want to take that test.
A lot of if you score pretty high,
I guarantee you it would not be pretty.
Okay,
I might qualify at the Jesse Tree for assistance.
Yeah, because we do prioritize folks as well that are more highly vulnerable.
High on the ACE.
Not on it. We don't look at ACEs. We look at other stuff.
I would rock that.
You have to prioritize though. You do have to prioritize people that are more vulnerable because they need more support.
Life is hard.
Makes sense.
Like things stink.
But people that are under pressure and we see this folks that are struggling and right now it's the situation where folks are struggling financially. You know,
Right.
that's really the root of a lot of the tension that people are experiencing right now, especially renters. And that does cause mental health challenges. It causes more ER visits. It causes, poorer parenting or, divorce. It causes, I want to give any excuse for domestic violence, but it can cause,
Oh yeah.
more domestic violence if folks are in poverty. So
If you're
it,
on the edge of existence of being able to, if you got a kid and you're on the edge of being
yeah.
able to provide food and shelter, you go like, that's terrible. Like, of course it would produce more domestic violence. That's not
Yeah.
the sole
Not
reason
an
for domestic
excuse, but
violence.
yeah,
No,
but still,
absolutely not.
but
You're
yeah,
just talking about people that have been
just,
stretched to their capacity to
yeah,
make sense of the world. They're
right.
like, how is this happening? And like things start breaking down.
And
Like
they
that's when you have
just, yeah,
psychological breaks.
psychological breaks. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So the root cause of folks falling into homelessness in our community right now is just, the rising cost of rent. And so we're asking the question, and we have the opportunity to ask the question here in Idaho. What do we do with these people if, 60, 70% of the people entering our homeless system right now, they're not the frequent utilizers like you have in the Bay. You have, literally 10,000 people. They've had serious homeless problems since the 80s and 90s. A lot of the folks that are homeless there have been homeless for decades. We don't have that type of population in Idaho. We do have some of those folks. Let's get them out of homelessness quickly. It'll save us money. And then while these other folks are entering the system, let's give them a smaller level of support while they still need that smaller level of support and get them into housing or keep them in housing. So it is a tension point that our community is wrestling with because we do have a growing homeless population, but we can't just rehouse them. We have to keep more people out of homelessness as well. And the people that are entering homelessness, how do we get them more quickly out of homelessness? In our community, most folks that are entering this system, in order to get just like a rapid rehousing voucher, the waiting time is about 2 years. So in that time frame of 2 years, folks are homeless. They're developing more issues, health issues, costing the community. Let's get them out quicker. The problem is we need more resources. And yeah, our state does not put any money towards homeless solutions.
But we do put a dump truck of money towards the byproduct of homelessness,
which is our health system,
right.
Medicaid. These folks do cost a lot. I think Medicaid is extremely important, but they do utilize our health system a lot, folks that are homeless. If we housed them, our health system would see significant cost savings, same as our jails. Our first responders, the costs that police and fire, have to respond to these situations, and then just the cost of maintaining our shelters. So that's what we need to do in Idaho, I think. And we need to keep it simple. I kind of dogged on the federal government for overcomplicating matters. I think we tend to overcomplicate matters as well by saying these people need to do X, Y, or Z before they can get housing, or they need to do X, Y, or Z before, we can keep them in their home. We have to check like 20 different boxes before they do that. Actually, if we just give people money and support, some strings attached with those services, they need to try to engage in services and improve their lives. So there's a little bit of strings attached there, but those two things, we can solve homelessness. Let's not overcomplicate it in Idaho.
I really enjoyed having Reverend Bill Roscoe on.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed having you on. You mentioned that you and Reverend Bill Roscoe agree on a lot of things. Like, if I may ask, and I'm like,
Sure.
I don't know what the right answer is. So let me be clear before I ask, like, what is it that you guys, what are nuances that you guys might differ on?
I don't want to throw Boise Rescue Mission under the bus in any respect.
Sure.
They're a very important organization in our community. They get so many people in better situations than they are before. There is some debate between what a low barrier shelter is and a higher barrier shelter. We have lower barrier shelter in our community, which is Interfaith Sanctuary. They accept people that, maybe are using drugs or have serious health issues. Whereas I do think Boise Rescue Mission accepts those people, but they have more rules around it. So you could debate, whether or not it's better to have a lower barrier or a higher barrier shelter. For sure, there's arguments on both sides. I don't think we differ on a lot, honestly. We all we're all doing this work to serve people.
Yeah, right.
And try to solve the problem of homelessness.
Right.
I'm on the side, my nonprofit, Jesse Tree, is on the side of trying to keep people out of homelessness. So we, pay people's rent and provide them with services before they end up homeless. So
which ultimately saves us all money in the long run.
It does. $2,000 versus $18,000 to get someone out of homelessness, plus the cost of, you've got the cost of keeping someone homeless. But all that to say is like Jesse Tree can't catch everybody before they end up homeless. So we need our shelters. We need our rapid rehousing providers, which in our community is Catch is the main provider. We need permanent supportive housing like we have at New Path. We need housing vouchers. Like we need all of these solutions all at once. And so, yeah, we're working on different spectrums of the issue.
And there's always I don't think I have very limited knowledge in this area, but as with most things in life, it's like there are lots of ways to skin the cat.
Right.
And it's very obvious that you are both passionately and intensely working towards solutions, and perhaps even with addressing specific problems, right? Like, or unique problems. And I think it's wonderful. I will tell you conclusively, without fail, that I have felt bad for moving here for a lot of reasons, but this one makes me feel the worst. Which is knowing that I'm part of a system that has driven up the cost of housing.
You're just going to have to donate to all these nonprofits.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I don't know. Or come volunteer.
Yeah. I can pay you a significant amount from my $0 an hour job doing podcasting plus benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just tell everybody how important it is to donate. Again, we talked about this last time, but just getting folks who are coming into Idaho to understand how our problems around homelessness are different is so important. Like, again, we are not San Francisco. We don't have 10,000 people living outside. Let's stay that way.
And we don't have open drug scenes. Like our law enforcement does not tolerate that.
Well, and part of it is because we don't have so many people and we haven't allowed so many people to be homeless for so long. I mean, that's part of it too. Our homeless population is, a lot of folks, like I said, are entering the system for the first time. So they don't have as many chronic problems as other homeless populations.
Got it.
I want to say one more thing about Reverend Roscoe. One other
I thought
way
you were going to say you're not a bad person, Matt. But
you
you didn't say that. You were like, nope, you should feel as bad as you do.
One other way we align is just the importance, again, of services. And I want to emphasize none of these organizations operate in a way where we're just like, oh, you need money? Okay, here's a check.
Sure.
None of us operate that way. All of our services are so much more than a rent check. That's part of it because that's part of the problem. People need money. However, with all of our resources, we are coupling them with case management, and we all agree that is the most important part. Having a social worker to talk to you about why you ended up in this situation, how you can avoid ending up in this situation again, how you can better your future, how you can improve your budget, maybe increase your income, cut expenses, how you can get more education to get a better job in the future. Social workers are doing amazing things with the people that we all serve. And so I think it's really important to emphasize that, especially in Idaho, where we have this mentality, like all these people just need to figure it out. Why do they need my money? Why are you, Jesse Tree, writing them their landlord a check for $2,000? It's like, well, we're not just doing that. We are making sure that they don't end up in this situation again. And what's really cool is our data shows that over the last 5 years, Jesse Tree served about 1,000 families a year, about 3,000 people a year who are being evicted. Over the last 5 years, we know that 95% of the people that we served have not ended up homeless over that time period. So
your recidivism is 5%. You're like, listen, if Jesse Tree helps you, if we help a family, that family,
they're not
through our selection process and our support, they have a 95% chance of not becoming homeless again.
Yes. Or not homeless, period.
Not homeless, period, ever. In the time that you guys have existed.
$2,000 investment is what it takes up front. And that's the case for all of our services, for what, the shelter does, for the rescue mission, for interfaith, for catch. If we can catch people, and if we are able to administer, unfortunately, we have to administer services on a select basis. Most of us, we're having to, like I said, select those top high utilizers, people that really need the help. But there are a ton of other people on all of our waiting lists that could just use a little bit of help, and we can't help them because we don't have the resources. So if we could have more resources, get further upstream on this problem in Idaho, I really think we could solve it. But our nonprofits have to have resources. Until we solve the affordable housing crisis and the rent to wage gap, we have to have our nonprofits well resourced in all of these areas. And I would love to see them get to a place where we don't have to prioritize, only this person or that person for that services. And we don't have to overcomplicate things and say, sorry, you have to check 20 boxes before you can get this resource.
That's a lot. I have learned a lot in the last hour. Thank you for coming in to explain this. Thank you for what you're doing. Is there anything that you missed right now?
I don't think so. I think I caught it all. I got in the Californians, do your part. I got in these people, need a little bit of help before they can help themselves. Yeah. I got into let's not overcomplicate this issue. We know what people need. We know what it takes to solve this problem. So I think we're good.
God bless you, woman. Thank you for what you're doing for Idaho, and thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.